Okay, it's my little button says that the recording has started. I always have to apologize that there's a lag time between when it tells me that it's recording, and so we're both my guest and I are sitting here staring at the screen and I don't. I'm always afraid to edit what I do
Yeah.
because I'm such a Luddite. I can't do it without. I'm so afraid I'm going to destroy. So I figure 5 seconds of me staring at a screen isn't too much for viewers to put up with.
Exactly.
So I'm not going to risk ruining the whole. But anyway, thanks everyone for joining us. My ring light broke, so unfortunately we're left with this garish sort of strange lighting here in the room with my bald head reflecting off into cyberspace. But that's another thing you have to put up with. And my dogs are here today, so you might see them roaming around in the background, which is fine. All right, so enough banter. I can't stand YouTube videos that start with like 8 minutes of banter. But the banter can be fun, especially on podcasts when you're driving and you like to, and it's guys and all that stuff.
You need to ease people in sometimes,
Yes, you do. But anyway, my guest today is Father Harrison Ayre. He is a priest of the Diocese of Vancouver.
Victoria.
Victoria. I'm sorry. I'm an American who's
we spit at the name of Vancouver.
You'll have to excuse. Well, we could get into that maybe. I've never been to Vancouver, but I'm told it's a beautiful city.
We got to get you out here sometime.
Yeah,
it's actually quite amazing out here, especially if you like the ocean.
Now the trouble is that doesn't Canada require vaccination to get into the country or something?
Right now, but I don't see that lasting much longer.
Okay, well, good, because yours truly is one. Right. I'm not a Trumper. I'm not an anti-vax nut job. Yeah. I'm not a conspiracy, but I felt no need to get the vaccine.
Yeah. And plus, you already had COVID. I think if you've had it in the last 6 months, I don't think you need vaccination.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I had it clear last summer. It was fairly mild, so who knows what's going to happen. And it's probably going to kill me, and I'll be one of those people on my deathbed saying, "I wish I'd gotten that vaccine." But anyway, I don't have it.
We're all going to die.
And I don't mean anything ideological by it. I just didn't want to risk the side effects when I practically live like a hermit.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I got it, and for many reasons. One is so I can get into hospitals.
Oh yeah,
we are in a high risk profession, if you will. But like I'm not. They're starting to talk about fourth doses here, and I'm like, nope. After the third dose, it knocked me out for a few days. I'm like, it's not worth the risk.
Yeah. And anyway, let's not get into that because I'm really shocked by how many epidemiologists there suddenly are on Facebook and other places, experts in infectious diseases who think they know everything, and I'm certainly not one of them.
Right.
So there you go. But anyway, Father Harrison Ayre, priest of the Diocese of Victoria. Also, scholar extraordinaire. We talked about his book last time. Remind me of the title.
Mysterion, the revelatory power of the sacramental worldview.
Mysterion. I've read it twice, and perhaps we could delve into that a little bit more. It's a great book. I encourage everybody to get it. But today, we're going to talk about several topics. Oh, by the way, Father Harrison Ayre is also, this is how I got to know him. He's one of two guys, along with Father Jonathan, of the Clerically Speaking podcast, and I encourage everybody to go look up his podcast because he and Father Jonathan are not only smart and insightful. What's that? Oh gosh. I'm talking Father Anthony. Yeah. I'm thinking of another podcast. I do so many of these with people podcasts, and there was one I just did with Father Jonathan of some podcast. I can't remember now. So yeah. So
I can't wait to go on the next step when we record next week to say, "Hi, Father Jonathan, how you doing?"
So give my apologies to Father Anthony because I really did enjoy our discussion of aliens and vampires the last time I was on your show. We were going to discuss all these weighty topics, and he said, "I want to talk about whether a priest can be a vampire or whatever," because of an email that he had gotten. Yes, Father Anthony and Father Harrison. My wife is going to kill me because she was the one who introduced me to you two, and she's a huge fan. Anyway, I want to talk. We're going to talk about several things today. We're going to talk about priestly morale, especially amongst the ranks of the diocesan clergy, which I think is an increasing problem in the church. There's my dog in the background. I'd also want to discuss the synod on synodality that is coming up and try to get Father Harrison's take on synodality. I also want to talk about a theologian that is a favorite of both of ours, but has recently come under heavy criticism from the traditionalist wing of the church, Hans Urs von Balthasar. Those of you who watch my videos know how much I love defending Balthasar. So we'll get into that. But I want to start with the synodality stuff, and then we'll get into the priestly morale stuff. I'd be very interested in before I prejudice the conversation with my absolutely correct opinions on what the synod is all about, I'd just like to get your initial generic thoughts on the synod, on synodality, and what you think of this process, because obviously you're going to be a part of it.
Well, sort of. When I first heard about it in our diocese, I said, "Oh, great, more work."
Yeah.
I am not against good theological notions of the synodality, right? I think it's integral to the life of the church. I mean, I would actually even argue Ratzinger, who I'm doing my thesis on, would make many strong arguments towards the notions of synodality collaboration. But I think synodality is not so much what it's becoming very quickly, at least in North America, which is a very bureaucratic process and it's very hamstrung by very ethereal sentences that have no substance whatsoever to them. It is something more lived. It's funny because as a pastor, I struggle with things like pastoral councils. I don't know how to run them, and that's because I just talk to people in my parish and I listen. I ask questions. What do they think? What are they wanting? And I've always thought that that's good synodality. Oh, you want to do this? Great. You're in charge then. And you can do this. And synodality, I think, in that sense, and in that notion of collaboration, I think, ought to always be a good practice of ecclesial life. But the synod, and maybe, who's to say, maybe that will be something that will be strongly encouraged through this synod. But the actual process itself, well, it was funny because actually when our bishop was talking to us about it, I said that, I was like, Bishop, all I hear is more work. And I'm kind of stretched as it is right now. And so someone in my parish was really eager to want to do this. And I said, well, I'll be honest, I don't really have a lot of time to do this.
Yeah,
I am not against, if you want to do the work, you got my blessing. And I promised I would do a homily on it, and
sure,
in a good communal style of synodality. And then I put her in charge of it. And I said, you do the sessions or whatever. But not enough people signed up for any of the sessions. In my parish, at least. Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had expressed concerns about the way some of the questions were formed. I wasn't against them per se, but I had made suggestions about how, if you want to attract more people to be part of the process, adding good, weighty terms of the tradition may attract more people to this discussion, because my experience has been, not just in my diocese, but more broadly talking to people, is that these synod sessions in parishes and dioceses, etc., are only tending to attract one type of person in the church. And that's not synodality. That's not going out to the peripheries. That is just, bolstering up an already established position by people who already, who are just, and talking to some people. It's like, it's not becoming really an experience of synodality and listening. It's, this is my opportunity to help the church what she needs to change.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked before we went on. I asked you if you had read my recent article in Catholic World Report on synodality, and you said you had not. You just don't have the time, and I don't understand why you don't have the time to read every wonderful thing that's ever flowed off my word processor. But anyway, I did. Like I said, this is why I didn't want to prejudice the conversation. Because you haven't read my article, and I just wanted your generic response. Yeah. And it's wonderful because you agree with almost everything that I wrote.
I had a feeling about this.
Yeah. So great minds think alike.
Exactly.
It's a cliche, but in this case, absolutely true. Now, here's the deal. All right. I agree with you completely. As somebody deeply ingrained in the communio theology school of the church, I believe in what is called communion ecclesiology. that flows out of Lumen Gentium and its notion of collegiality and the church as mystery, mysterion, that Christ is the core of the church, and Christ brings us the communion of the Trinity and Trinitarian life. And insofar as we are in communion with the church and her sacramental life, we are in communion with Christ. We are then part of this circumcision, this communio of Trinitarian life. And this is what grounds the Vatican II's notion of the people of God. The people of God are not a generic democratic polis of people who now just vote, with whatever they want. The people of God means those gathered around the communion, the Trinitarian communion, that mystery. Okay, all that being said, a communion ecclesiology absolutely demands a more synodal structure to the church for reasons that I just articulated. It certainly would go against hyper-papalism, the hyper-centralization of everything in the church. As I mentioned in the article, in Traditionis Custodes, that latest motu proprio from the Pope, there's even legislation in there telling parishes how and when they can actually advertise in their parish bulletin when the traditional Latin Mass is going to happen. And I remember thinking, now we're micromanaging what goes into a parish bulletin from Rome, all in the name now. And so this is the Vatican that is supposedly now in charge of creating synodality, the Vatican that is now ruling through motu proprios more than any previous papacy almost combined, which is a very anti-synodal thing to do. So I'm suspicious. I'm very suspicious. Right. And then for some of the reasons that you mentioned, it seems like a lot of anodyne buzzwords that created by a bureaucratic apparatus that has certain conclusions already in mind that it wants to reach, and has now developed these sorts of questionnaires to sort of tease out. I talk about how it's the essence of the modern bureaucratic spirit to engage in change by mimicking democratic processes and then manipulating them from within to reach the desire. Because you hit on something here with regard to these questionnaires. They're unscientific, for starters. They're not created by anybody with any sort of polling research sort of data and studies. The experts in that. And all that you're going to get is a self-selected group of people, as you just pointed out. You're going to get sort of activists of the right and the left, and then you're going to get that sort of 5% of parishioners that would show up to anything that the pastor says, let's have a meeting on mosquito control in the parish garden or something. And they would show up for that. Okay. And
shoot me now. Sorry.
So I don't think these questionnaires are worth a hoot. And there's also, to me, a hint, and I'll turn it back over to you. There's the heresy in the early church called Montanism. Long story short, it was that the Holy Spirit grants sort of new revelations to people inwardly, an illumination, and they can then use this new. So you see this in the modern church of people talking about various changes to church teaching, and they'll say, "Well, God is doing a new thing." That's ultimately a kind of Montanist, a sort of neo-Montanism. And to me, there's a sort of neo-Montanist pneumaticism, spiritism. So what is the Holy Spirit telling you people right now? No, that's a valid question in one sense to ask. It's the Spirit is in us. There is the faith of the people. But I am suspicious that what's going on here is trying to elicit comments that would then justify deep changes to church teaching, and especially in matters of human sexuality, as you see in the German Synod.
Right. And I think and a lot of the people, when they go into this kind of subjectivist pneumatic experience of the church, it's charism devoid of institution. Right? Which you can't do. It's content without form. It's actually form without content, really, actually. But you cannot have, like, I love Ratzinger brings up this great in his essay on the new movements. He talks about the interplay between charism and institution and how you can't have one without the other. And I think this is the thing. They think, oh, the Spirit's doing this new thing, but it is in a kind of neo-Montanist sense of an imminent experience of the Holy Spirit that looks at development only in the realm of progress rather than rooted in anything in the past. And it gets to something you were talking about earlier around ecclesiology here around and the synod is synodality in the synodal structure of the church. It's not something built. We do not build the city of God. It's received. And so you see this kind of, you see really, I would argue, a pseudo-Marxist vision of praxis and history at play here, rather than the priority of the metaphysical view of the church, of her being, and then acting out of this. These are questions that Ratzinger just keeps on like pummeling after over and over and over again. Like it's funny because I think he would actually be okay with a synod on synodality, because he, more than anyone, hated so many of the bureaucratic structures of the church. Like when he founded the Casa Balthazar, because I got to know Father Servet a little bit. Father Servet told me that Ratzinger was kind of the sponsoring cardinal that got it all started. And Ratzinger, they're like, well, Father Servet, should we do this? He goes, no, there's too much bureaucracy in the church. We need to allow things to develop more organically. And I think that's the case. I think, and I'll be honest, I actually think someone like Francis actually does kind of agree with that.
Oh, I think he does too.
This has been the interesting thing to me. I actually think their ecclesiologies are not so different as people like to think they are. But their mode of going about it is incredibly, incredibly different.
Yes. Well, let's talk about Pope Francis for a second, because he's integral to this entire process of synodality, because he's the push behind it, and he's entirely correct. The church needs to be more synodal, and I've been critical of Pope Francis. I'm not a Francis fanboy, as those who follow me know, but I'm also not of that traditionalist ilk that just views him as a heretic and a horrible pope that's just, and I think that if you look at him, he's an enigma. He's hard to pigeonhole. And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But the deal is this: he's got this reputation now of being a liberal. Oh, this pope's a liberal. He's a progressive. But when you look at the laundry list of issues that liberals want, Pope Francis hasn't checked any of those boxes.
That's right.
They want women priests? No. They want married priests? No. They want married women deacons? No. They want abortions. They want abortion and contraception and gay marriage and all that? No. All right.
Transgenderism? Absolutely not.
What's that?
No, he's been very hard on transgenderism.
Oh, transgenderism. He talks about ideological colonization. He hasn't checked any of those boxes. He's big on Marian devotions, talks about the devil all the time. I mean, this is clearly not an unreconstructed post-Vatican II liberal. Pope Francis is in some ways sui generis. He's a unique and interesting fellow. Clearly not a scholar, as, say, JP2 or Benedict were. Makes too many off-the-cuff remarks, but maybe that's part of it. And even his use of motu proprios, it seems to me. I mean, in other words, it's entirely possible for an autocrat, and I'm not saying the papacy is an autocracy, but it's entirely possible for an autocrat to devolve authority from the autocratic center through autocratic measures. And I view his rash of motu proprios as him trying to use the papal office in some ways to de-emphasize the papal office.
And I would even argue like his off-the-cuff comments in a way I think is forcing people themselves internally. And I wonder sometimes, like, is that on purpose almost, that we have to stop hanging by every single word the Pope does. For most centuries, most people didn't even know what the Pope said every day.
Or often.
All they knew was his name.
Or who he was. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We didn't have instant access to encyclicals and every little word he said. Oh my God, the Pope is limping. Who the frick cares? He's old. Of course he's limping. I limp sometimes, and I'm only 39. Like,
yeah.
Who the frick cares? Like, there is this.
Well, Pope John Paul spent the last 10 years of his papacy with Parkinson's tremors, and so this Pope is a pain in the knee. Big deal.
Yeah. So it's like we have this. There is essentially there is a cultural ultramontanism in the West, not just with regards to the papacy, but with regard to any form of leadership, of which every word, every gesture is held on to with such heaviness. And I think this is actually why, something we can bring up later in our conversation around morale. I think because everything is so under scrutiny at all times. I think this is why, like, a lot of guys don't want to become bishops nowadays when they get those calls, because who wants to be under the constant scrutiny? Every word, where there's going to be hot takes on Twitter and Facebook and blog posts and all this stuff. There is a cultural ultramontanism that it almost is looking for leaders to fail always. And I don't think that's good. And so it's funny, I think we're actually more modern in our vision of the papacy than the papacy is meant to be. John Paul II revolutionized the papacy to be something that, I was talking to someone the other day, someone was asking me about, popes retiring and stuff. I said, honestly, I'm actually all for it.
Yeah.
Because John Paul II made the papacy a worldwide ministry. He truly made it universal. Yeah. You need to get on planes. Like, this is why Benedict had to step down, and rightfully so. John Paul II had a certain witness at this time, but also Ratzinger saw the kerfuffles of disorganization in Rome while Pope John Paul II was declining. And I will not be surprised if Francis retires once Benedict dies.
I wouldn't either.
But anyway, But I think that's actually a good thing, because all those things, these off the cuff judgments, the reorganization right now of the dicasteries in Rome and everything, and the congregations, this is a form of decentralization. I think he's trying to almost spiritually get us into a place of, yes, the Pope's important. Yes, he is the principle of unity for the church, but we don't need to hang on to his every word, and maybe we need to stop paying attention to that so much. But at the same time, he does a lot of gestures to draw attention to himself too. So, like, with the poor, like the Holy Thursday prison visits and stuff like this, right? Like, and those aren't bad things, because the office has to do symbolic things too. But
I'm absolutely, and we'll get back to synodality in a second. I'm of two minds with regard to the sort of celebrity of the papacy. Full disclosure, Pope John Paul II was one of my ecclesiastical heroes, especially of my youth. He still remains, for me, the most formative and inspiring ecclesiastical figure of my lifetime, and I think of the 20th century. But and he had a very profound geopolitical vision that was his mission. I mean, people need to remember that John Paul was a Polish poet and mystic, and he was a lover of his native country. And one of his primary motivations was to get the Soviet Union the hell out of Poland. And so he sort of made that geopolitical vision part of his mission. All that, and in an age of media, in an age of celebrity, why not have the Pope also be a celebrity? I mean, our youth flock to music concerts of all kinds of anti-hero types of people. So many of our celebrities really are nefarious and devious sorts of people. Why not have someone like a John Paul be a celebrity, be in the media? Now, but the downside of that, of course, is then what you just said, the hyper focus on the papacy. He's like an oracle on the Tiber. Every word that flows out of his mouth. Oh my God, the Pope had a hiccup today. What does that mean? That is not good for the church. No. Not at all. And
it's not good for any civil society. I mean, like, I'm not a man of politics or anything. But like, I think people, like Joe Biden stumbling all over a lot of words, for example, like, he's old, folks. Like, what do you expect? Like, let's chill. Like, man, like, the obsession is just insane.
Not to mention the fact, I mean, he was 78 when we elected him, and he had the beginnings of word stumble even then. If you look at Joe Biden's career, his word stumbling goes way back. So anyway,
but it's like, but we do this all the time, and it happens in politics. It happens in the church.
So your point about ultramontanism is not just in the church in some analogous way; it's also in the world. I would say that the entire movement of modernity is towards ever greater centralization, religiously, politically, and so on. Centralization. And that's because I think there are so many centrifugal forces out there threatening to rip things apart, that what you need, in other words, the center does not hold. And this is true in the church as well. I think one of the reasons why so much authority coalesced around the Pope was that there were so many centrifugal forces, say post-Trent forward, that were threatening to just rip the church to not just the Reformation, but the Enlightenment and political revolution and the rise of democracy and secular culture and the scientific revolution. And I mean, there were all these forces just wanting to spin the church off into a million directions. And so the church's response was, we need a strong center. Mm-hmm. So my question, to get back to synodality, is this. I'm all in favor of synodality. But is there not also a danger in a decentralized church, in a very synodal church, where authority is multifocal and all over the map, that those centrifugal forces might rise? I mean, look, what if the Germans just decided, for example, in their synodal way, to do whatever it is that they want? Rome's going to have to do something, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's Rome's job. And I mean, with Germany, Rome did do stuff in the early days of the synod. Like, I read Francis's letter to Germany, and I got a hold of like some of the canonical documents that were sent to the synod. Man, they were heavy-handed. And I will not. My sense of someone like Francis is he's the kind of guy who says, let's let things play out.
Yeah.
To where they're going to go, and then when they go that step ultimately too far, that's when we can finally say, because they've shown all their cards at that point, right? So I don't think we're quite there yet, although it seems like we all know where it's going to go. I mean, but Germany is crazy. Oh my gosh. Anyways, I don't disagree with you. I think, but this is again, it came out of Synod of Bishops in the 80s talking about the ecclesiology of Vatican II, right? And the term to interpret the entirety of Lumen Gentium and the entirety of the ecclesiology of Vatican II was hierarchical communion.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is the principle. It's not something purely horizontal. It's also not something purely vertical, but it's something more organic. And it needs to take its Trinitarian roots of the hierarchical communion of the Trinity into strong implementation into the life of the church. And I think, and what that means, it's hard in the Roman Rite, because the Roman Rite is so worldwide, but it's Roman. And this is something I remember. I went to a music workshop years and years ago, and I met someone who was Eastern Catholic, and they were telling me some stuff about things. I thought, maybe the Roman Rite's too big, because there's something to the East. Now, the problem with the Eastern view is it's so tied to culture that it's hard to grow outside of itself. There's something really beautifully weird about the Roman Rite, about how adaptable it's been to multiple cultures. But I also think there's something that needs to be adaptable, the Roman Rite's ability to adapt to culture, I think, needs to be encouraged and allowed. So what does that mean? It means strong central principles that here's the faith.
Yeah.
But unity does not mean uniformity.
Right.
And I think in the Roman Rite, we have tended to presume the two as being the same thing. And authority in the Roman Rite right now, I think, has been doing that too. It's interesting. When I got to my current parish, so our bishop, as per the germ, is allowed, the general instruction of the Roman Ritual is allowed to determine posture at a certain point, parts of the Mass. And he does. And so we kneel at the consecration and stand at the mystery of faith. And that happens in other dioceses around the world, right? I've never, whatever, who cares? Well, in my parish, there's a lot of kneelers up until the doxology. And initially I was like, no, we got to be together. But then I was like, do we have to? We're all here. We're all receiving the Eucharist. We're all united there.
That's right.
Uniformity is not necessary to mean unity. And so I've actually decided to just not care.
Absolutely.
Who cares, right? And it's like,
absolutely.
It gets to things around liturgy. It gets to things around to allow priests and the faithful in what is legitimate in the life of the church to do what's best for them for the particular reasons they want to do them. And if you do that, I think you have your central authority that's governing things somewhat properly to ensure you don't go to the extremes of craziness. Like Ratzinger did this with the Neocats, right? He said, you guys can do your liturgy, but you guys have to you got to bring it in a bit. I think that's an effective use of of authority, but also then letting the freedom to say, well, this is what's needed in this particular circumstance for these reasons.
Yeah, and there's a sort of chicken and the egg quality to this question, because the fact is that true synodality, the kind that you're describing, can only happen in a healthy church. It can only happen. Yeah, well, a relatively healthy or a healthier church than what we have now.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. And by healthy church, I mean a church where almost everybody does agree, at least on the basic principles of the faith, that we're all supposed to be pursuing holiness and Christ is the center and so on. You know, a certain baseline. And you have to have a seriousness about that in order for synodality to work. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, an over-centralized church has a tendency to infantilize people. And so you don't get those evangelical impulses rising up from below that creates the healthy church you need for synodality. That's why I said chicken and the egg. So maybe you do eventually just need to, as Francis is doing, rip the Band-Aid off the scab and say, we're doing this synod thing, and there's going to be some disruptions. So just go with it. I'm just concerned about a lot of what's up. There's a great article, I don't know if you've seen it, in the last issue of Communio, which is devoted to synodality. A great article by the theologian Mike Hanby, who's a friend of mine, on synodality. And he makes the point that what he sees in the current process, especially from its popularizers like Massimo Fagioli, is a sociological understanding of the church rather than a metaphysical understanding.
Exactly.
Of the church. And that gets to the nub of what both you and I are saying is our number one fear here. Synodality, great, but it better be rooted in a communion ecclesiology, a hierarchy of communion, and not some vulgarized, democratized notion of the people of God in this pneumaticist sense, which then gets really reduced to a kind of purely sociological understanding of the church, which is not healthy.
And so this is all interesting to me too, because like the central question I'm pursuing in my thesis is a little phrase that Ratzinger puts in Principles of Catholic Theology. He says the biggest crisis today is the mediation of history in the realm of ontology. Just like, and I focused on it because thanks to Tracy Rowland, who I've gotten to know myself, and
she's great.
She's great. And she's been a big help on this topic because she keeps on, every article she writes on Ratzinger, she keeps on bringing up that little sentence. So it became like a little earworm for me. But this is what we're seeing. This is the question, right? This is the big overarching question of culture, philosophy, and theology. How does change and sameness, the one and the many, come together? And so a modern metaphysics, which reduces everything to an immanent frame and can only... and the spirit becomes absolutized within history in like a Hegelian sense of things, only praxis is possible, right? And so everything is practically minded. But if you have a real distinction, so this is the thing, a lot of Catholics, again, have been informed by modern philosophy and culture, and they just don't realize it. And so the church really, like, we need some frickin' theologians again out there to start doing the work.
Well, we're trying.
We're trying
here. I'm doing my bit for King and Country. Come
on.
I know. Yeah, but anyway, that's a nice segue. Let's leave synodality behind. But that's a nice segue into talking a little bit about Balthasar, but we can branch out from there, because you've just nailed, I think, a central issue with regard to that. I see a problem with the traditionalist movement. I describe myself sometimes as a sort of trad adjacent sort of. I consider myself a kind of traditionalist. I think communio theologians are a kind of traditionalist, obviously. But what this new traditionalism sort of is all about is a kind of scorched earth rejection of that of any theology that wants to take account of history mediated through ontology. Okay, so you go back all the way to Maurice Blondel and others of that framework.
I did my master's thesis on Blondel.
Oh, well, great. So you're the right guy to talk to, because I love Blondel. But the trads just dismiss him as the proto-modernist, the ur-modernist, because Lagrange said so.
But Lagrange couldn't read L'Action.
No.
He tried to read a few pages, and he said, I couldn't understand. He said, I wish they would translate it into French. It was written in French. He couldn't, because he couldn't understand it. It's a slog of a work.
Well, it is. And Lagrange freely admitted that he never read it.
Yes, exactly.
Even as he condemned Blondel and Blondelianism over and over. And why? Because Blondel says this, and rightly so, right? The church's entire theological and philosophical structure, neo-scholasticism of that time, had so emphasized the realm of the objective, the non-historical, these changeless, objective, timeless truths that exist up here above history, above time, and so on. And from those basic dogmas, you can then deduce all of these following conclusions. Mm-hmm. And none of it requires taking into consideration of human subjectivity, history, historicity, or any of those things. Even though God became incarnate in a historical situation, and the church is a historical entity, and human beings live in time and are subjects. And even Aquinas said, quid recipitur, secundum modum recipientis recipitur. What's received is received according to the mode of the receiver. Yep. Right. So Blondel says, what's so bad about proceeding from below, in a sense, taking a look at the dynamism of the human spirit, the dynamism of the human religious questing after transcendence, and let's not so easily dismiss the historical manifestations of that, or the manner in which the Christian evangel has sort of baptized that and evolved it, and the manner in which human subjectivity and its appropriation of the faith is so vitally important. And so then that became the Nouvelle Theologie of de Lubac and others who wanted to emphasize more this immanence. And that's what gets labeled, sometimes rightly, modernism, right? Yeah. Because of the extreme historicists. But now the trads want to say any theology from de Lubac, Ratzinger, Balthasar, any of these guys is all tainted with modernism because they don't stay with a kind of neo-scholastic deductivism. And so that's why they end up rejecting Vatican II's project, the Ressourcement project. And their entire idea now is we just need to scrape the entirety of that project off the ecclesial landscape. And we need to go back to the syllabus of Ayre's church and neo-scholasticism.
You know how to get my blood boiling in a good way.
Yeah. So
this is because man, where to start? First, just the first couple quick little interesting tidbits about Blondel. One is 2 popes wrote his bishop in Aix, telling the bishop that they approve of Blondel's work and they're grateful for his work and love for the church. 2 popes, not 1, 2. I think it was 11 and definitely 11th and Pius 11th, and was it Benedict the 15th? Maybe Benedict. I can't remember now the second one. Anyways, that's the first one. The second one is I found a little correspondence between de Lubac and Blondel. And Blondel actually went after de Lubac a bit with his nature supernature thing, because he said he warned de Lubac about over theologizing the philosophical, which I always found very interesting. Blondel is a unique figure in that he never was in any camp whatsoever. He was hard to pin. He did not fall into the Gilson school, nor did he fall into the Maritain school. Like like when the debates around Christian philosophy debates in the 1930s, he said, well, no, I'm going to propose a Catholic philosophy. Well, everyone's talking about Christian philosophy. No, I'm going to propose a Catholic philosophy. It's just, he never wanted to be pigeonholed by any one group here. And here's the thing, because this is my argument I've always loved to make. Neo-Thomists are veiled Kantians. They're veneered Kantians. You know, they have the veneer of tradition, but their inner life is because the subjective, let me rephrase this, but the distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal comes to play in their kind of metaphysical worldview, and so immanentists, like, they don't realize really in the end they're actually the immanentists they hate.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never thought of it this way. So please elaborate.
It's been a while since I've had a chance to talk about this like this. It is great.
I aim to serve.
Yeah. So what Blondel's argument? Let's go with Blondel here for a bit, because he is. You're right. He is, and just quickly too, is the reason they're going after the communal guys. The reason they're going after Blondel is because they are the theology of Vatican II.
Yeah.
And so if you want to undermine Vatican II, you have to undermine its authors. You have to undermine its theological and philosophical influences. My argument in my master's thesis was that Blondel was the philosopher of Vatican II.
I agree.
Which I would agree with, obviously, and I think I made it somewhat convincingly. But Blondel's whole project was that he noticed something in modernism, right? He noticed its strong immanentism, which is the whole modern project, right? That's Hegel, right? Absolute spirit. But this is where it gets really interesting. And actually, I was just reading this morning. Schindler's
Homo
Little
Abyssus.
Guide. Schindler's Little Guide to. I've read Homo Abyssus. It nearly broke my brain.
It's not for the faint of heart.
No, I actually had to take a break from studies for 2 months because I read that and Guevara's Analogia Entis at the same time, and that was the dumbest move in the history of thinking. But I've survived. Anyways, do not recommend. But because Ulrich makes the same argument, and Ulrich's also influenced by Blondel, by the way, that there's a theological a priori in modern metaphysics. And that the infinite spirit, as is understood in modern metaphysics, is the Christian God. It comes from revelation. It cannot come from reason alone. And so what's happened is in the modern spirit, immanentism has it's really God, the idea of God as it's revealed in Christian revelation, now all put in within the realm of the immanent. And so for Blondel, he noticed this, and his whole argument of his entire thesis is modernity isn't modern enough. This is his great argument. I love it. Because he's saying, actually, the Christian spirit's inherent in modernity, and so we need to tease out that desire for the infinite again and realize that it cannot fulfill itself imminently, right? So he does it in this great distinction between what he calls the willing will and the willed will, and that the willed will never fulfills what the willing will wants. This is very Augustinian too, by the way. I would love one day I want to do a little research on, because he did a whole thing he did a bunch of stuff on Augustine in his life. I'd love to talk with I want to research the Augustinian influence on him one day. And he shows that this willing will can never fulfill itself. And there's only two possibilities. It's utter nihilism, and not everything is meaningless, or in the end, which he argues that man is ordered towards a supernatural end. And he destroys the whole argument from nihilism right at the beginning of his thesis.
This not? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, this is also strikingly similar to de Lubach's project and the drama of atheist humanism, where his whole point is similar, that modernity has a certain anthropology that is rooted in this immanent frame, but that Christianity has the true anthropology and the true immanence that alone can fulfill humanity's supernatural end. And
and this is to bring it around maybe to Balthasar a bit, and Ratzinger and really the communion school, is they will argue that Jesus Christ is the concrete universal. The solution to the one and the many, of the immanent and the transcendent, is the person of Jesus Christ. And so Hegel was right. Christian revelation brings a deciding point, right? Or what Ulrich calls the crisis of reason. And this is what modernity, so they're right to address the question. The problem is they just kind of say, oh, this Christian idea is neat. That's actually just reason fulfilling itself within the immanent frame. And these modern Catholic theologians are saying, no, the person of Jesus cannot be reduced to this. And in fact, you are stealing revelation and subsuming it to reason, and you cannot do that. That is a philosophical no-no. You've gone beyond philosophy, actually. And so what does this have to do with the Neo-Thomists? To bring it to them too, is they see a real separation between the natural and the supernatural, right? They talk about the double ends and everything like this.
Yes.
But in all of this, there is no sense of subjectivity. But this is just on a basic level, this is bad Christology. Bad Christology, because if God took on our human nature, he takes on human subjectivity. He takes on the whole thing. And so the objective touches the subjective. And in the Christian tradition, it's the subjective that actually reveals the objective. This is sacramentality in the life of the church.
And this is Balthasar's entire trilogy, where he brings together the objective, which is the aesthetique,
Yep.
And then he welds that to the historical and subjective, the theodramatique. And then he welds that to the truth content that all of that evinces, and he calls it the theologic. And all three of those things interpenetrate one another and find their home in Christ.
Exactly.
And their resolution in Christ. And yet the traditionalists, who claim to be Neo-Thomists anyway, reject that entire edifice as modernist and retreat back to that two-tiered sort of view of things, which I think, as you rightly point out, creates enormous Christological questions and enormous Christological problems. And in my mind, as my friend Cale Zeldin says, a lot of this traditionalism is simply a coping mechanism. That what they're doing is they're fleeing the nihilism of modernity and seeking some kind of black and white, ironclad truth that is utterly objective and provable.
They're doing it in a totally modern way.
Yeah, that's the point. That this is an utterly modernist project that they're sort of engaged in this search for a kind of Cartesian certitude. Exactly. Only they find it in the forensic structures and legal structures of Catholicism, in its various propositional pronouncements and anyway, that's my take. I mean, like I said, though, I'm sympathetic with why they're upset. We're all upset with what happened after the council. But I would argue, people like you and I and the Communio school have every right to be the most upset of anyone after the council, because our theology won the day at the council, only to be scuttled afterwards by a cadre of theological nincompoops, in my scholarly language. Theological nincompoops.
You're being gentle too.
Who had nefarious motives, all right, and co-opted the entire process for a sort of secularist agenda, the reasons for which escape me.
And here's the interesting thing too, my experience too of the ultra rad trads, because like I put myself in as a traditionalist too, but in the living sense of that word, right? The word tradition is not some ossified. It's not just reading documents apart from their history and stuff like this. It's tradition lives. This is not just Vatican II. This predates all of that. And tradition is not just logical consequences of things. It has that element, right? Like Newman makes this argument in Development of Doctrine. He says doctrine in part is the logic, working out, but for him, it's the working out of ideas in history, and history even having an impact on the development of ideas in the Christian tradition. But at the same time, the ultra rad trad, I've yet to meet someone they are the most subjectivist people out there, who are trying to impose their truth, who all they care about is their own personal, emotional, subjectivist experience of things. They don't have a real metaphysic sense of symbol and sign. They don't have a robust Catholic metaphysics at the heart of it. It's all about, and I get it. Like, this is the thing, and this is where I think we need to go to the peripheries a bit, is to understand why they are this way. And I don't think we've done a good job at this in the church.
Right.
They are this way because they are untethered human beings, because modernity has created them to be untethered. They have no place to stand. And so in a spiritual desperation, they need to cling to something that gives them a sense of stability and sureness.
That coping mechanism.
Right. And fair enough. Who doesn't need that in life, right?
And that's why I think Traditionis Custodes was a bad idea, pastorally speaking. I think it was heavy-handed. Yep. There were other ways to deal with some of these issues that have cropped up in the TLM communities that were more pastoral, more going to the peripheries. Yeah. Once again, to bring it back full circle, hard to accept the synodality of a Vatican that says, we'll listen, but we're not going to listen to these voices over here. These voices don't count. Only these voices over here. Yeah. And I sort of bring that up in my article as well. Like, well, listening church, listening to whom? We have some evidence that you're not really willing to listen to everybody. And so I agree with you. Instead of just trashing the trads, that's why I describe myself as trad adjacent, trad sympathetic, because I understand where they're coming from. We're all upset with the ecclesial self-immolation that happened after the Second Vatican Council. We're all upset with the chaos and silly season, as George Weigel called it, that ensued. But there's a right way to deal with that, and there's a wrong way to deal with that. I like you think about living tradition. I mean, so many of the traditionalists, because they reject this modern theological project, the Communio project, it means that they're not just rejecting these theologians and Vatican II, they're rejecting the entire post-Vatican II history of the papacy. And the magisterium in general, 1962 forward. That means it's a rejection of Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict, as well as Francis, of course. And therefore, what kind of a sense of a living tradition can you have if your position is, well, the tradition stopped living and breathing in 1962? Well, actually, if you listen to some of the trads, it actually started to get squishy with Pius XI and Pius XII.
Yeah.
Pius XII tinkered with the liturgy in 1955 and already was a crypto-modernist in that sense.
Yeah. And so this is, I think this is the thing. So because they are inherently modernist, I came rereading this bit from, it's a essay in Principles of Catholic Theology on the problem of salvation history by Ratzinger. And Ratzinger brings up that the real difference of the problem is the relationship between Christology and the cross, because Christology says ontology and metaphysics are important, right? While the cross says, and so sameness, right? Something that endures. While in the Protestant tradition, the cross is the sign of discontinuity, right? It's the sign of utter change, of a radical reorientation from the being of this world. And so there has to be so the rad trad falls into this Protestant notion of the discontinuity between cross and history.
Very interesting.
And so they are becoming this Protestant, I have to make this leap. And so to do that, you have to reject the past. You have to reject the past, which is Marxist. You have to reject the past. But a good Catholic metaphysics always has to take past, present, future, integrated into the person of Jesus. Like this is Colossians chapter 1, right? He who was in the beginning, who was also the firstborn from the dead, and him, he's got the primacy of being. It is he who said the body of the church, the firstborn from the dead. So that all primacy maybe is in all things, and is he who said, and it's just like this whole great Colossians is this whole notion of the Word of God incarnate in Jesus Christ, encompassing the whole of time. Bonaventure calls the incarnation the geometric solution, whereby the cross enters the center of history to create the perfect circle, which allows now, because eternity has entered time, now time has its origin and its end. And so all of time, all of history has to be taken as theologically serious, and the trad doesn't do it. They just want to reject.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And I did my dissertation on Balthasar's, essentially his Trinitarian ontology and its implications for revelation in Christ. Volumes essentially 4 and 5 in English of the Aesthetic. And that's why this is very much this same problematic of the one and the many is kind of what drove Balthasar's entire analysis of the Trinitarian processions and circumcision. And what it is, I mean, it's the coming together in an infinite changelessness of a kind of infinite change. You know, it's being and becoming coming together. I had a debate with a rad trad on Facebook last week where he said that Ratzinger and Balthasar and those guys, they're all Hegelians because they spend all their time talking about
Hegel?
They spend all their time doing a theology of becoming. Everything is becoming in history for them. And I said, you obviously don't know Hegel. And you don't know these guys because they're not Hegelians. They're the anti-Hegelians. They're taking Hegel's insight and saying, you're sort of onto something, but you're really wrong. And here's how being and becoming coalesce infinitely in God.
Thomas talks about it in his metaphysics. Like,
go on. Yes.
Well, it's just he does. Like this is basic metaphysics 101, right? How does being and becoming come together? How do you have sameness? I mean, this is how metaphysics starts. how does the one and the many come together? How does change and sameness adhere together? And it's the question that has haunted the West since the beginning of metaphysics and the contemplation of being.
Says right? Heraclitus and Parmenides.
Being, the word being itself implies becoming, because it implies action, right? This is the thing, because like l'action for Blondel, really, it's an investigation into being.
It
is to act, right?
Which is why I have a hard time understanding why Gilson did not like Blondel, because as an existential Thomist who understands being primarily as act, I was reading some letters that Gilson sent to de Lubac, and he was he was down on Blondel.
Interesting.
So,
that's so yeah. But it's like but being is which implies living in history.
Yeah, it does.
And being is not some ethereal object, because this is the other problem. And I mean, and we all fall into it when we're maybe earlier on in our intellectual stages, is we treat being as a thing.
Yeah, it's reified, right. Made static, and then that translates into a sort of view of theology and dogmatics. It's also reified and static. And
One second.
Yeah, read from
this here, because that's such a great line. It's from Thomas's De Potentia. It's such a where was it here? 1 second.
Well, you're looking for
here it is. Yeah. Being is completum et simplex sed non subsistens. Subsistence. Being is at once perfect and non-existent. Being is no thing.
Yeah. Interesting. And that's Ulrich.
Yeah.
For my viewers,
that's Thomas.
Well, it's Ulrich quoting Thomas for Ulrich's philosophical purpose. For my viewers who don't know, and it's understandable that you don't know, Ferdinand Ulrich was a philosopher, European philosopher, wrote in German, very dense German, and he was very influential on people like Balthasar and guys like this in that school of thought. But his works have only recently been translated. A big shout out to D.C. Schindler for his work on that. I have a former student of mine, Dr. Rachel Coleman, who just got her PhD at the Institute in Washington. She did her dissertation on Ulrich. So I'm giving her a shout out. Rachel, if you're listening, God bless you for.
God bless her, man. She's done her purgatory.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, let's put all that behind us. We've been talking for about 55 minutes.
Yeah.
So in the time remaining to us, I want to completely shift gears.
Okay.
Because recently, what I you know more than I do, but I know, because of the circles I move in, I know lots and lots and lots of priests. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you do too. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that there is a crisis in priestly morale today. And I don't want to send you on your way without bringing this up and discussing it. I mean, we could go down a litany of problems. Obviously, it all begins with not enough priests. And so priests have all become circuit riders in charge of 2-3 parishes, as well as the high school and the cemeteries and everything else in between. And bishops don't know what to do. And so they just sort of basically work their priests to death. It's not that priests want to be, it's not that bishops want to be nasty, but they're boxed into a corner and they don't know what else to do, essentially, I guess. And so you end up with a lot of burned out priests. And I know a lot of them. You know a lot of them who are struggling along. Priests who want to take early retirement because they just can't do it anymore. Young priests who realize, what the heck did I just get myself into? Who are now deciding parish ministry is not for me after all. What do you see as the essence of the problem, and what can we do about it, Father?
It is a massive problem, and I think actually a lot of the stuff we've talked about plays into it in many ways. You talked earlier around the infantilization of people, and especially when you have autocratic structures in the church. That is a big problem, because what happens, someone asked yesterday on Twitter, give a one sentence line that you hear every day at your job. And mine is, Father, can I just talk to you for just a couple minutes about this little insignificant thing or whatever it is, right? That's my line. I'm like, oh gosh,
yeah.
But because my sense of being a pastor is for adults to do adult things according to the maturity level that they ought to be having. So if you're given charge of something in the life of a parish, you don't need my idea is, and I'm realizing like how much I actually have to train my parishioners in helping them understand that they are actually mature adults in the faith and not 3-year-olds. I'll give one example, and I've talked to my religious ed coordinator about this already, but I got an email from her saying, "Where do you want the kids to stand for confirmation?" I'm thinking to myself, you've been religious ed coordinator for 10 years. You should know where they stand. Why do I have to waste my time I pay you to make those decisions, and I had a good conversation with her about it to help her just realize, like, I actually trust you to do this, you don't need to go over things over and over again, because otherwise there's no point in paying people for do things. The other problem becomes, though, too, for priests with burnout is you try to give and delegate and trust people to do things, and they can't do it. You repeat yourself 5 or 6 times. The person finally understands it, and then you come back and they're gone, and you have to do it yourself anyways. I understand. I'm starting to understand why priests become micromanagers.
I'll interrupt for a second. Yeah. I had the same thing when I was still a professor, where we were mandated that we had to have student presentations in class. And so you'd turn over all these class sessions to the student presentations, which just made more work for me, because then I had to undo all the crap that they, in other words, I had to reteach everything anyway, because they got it all wrong. And so it would have been better off if I'd have just taught from the get. So in a lot of professions, there's this sense of I have to micromanage if I want it done right.
Right. And so I get that. You have to kill that inside you, because that will burn you out too. So I think there's a few things. So we're still operating out of older models of parish, of where the priest almost, like my rectory, thanks be to God, is not at the church. It's a few minutes away, because otherwise I would actually probably have left this parish a long time ago. And I keep my rectory private on purpose. Everyone needs their personal space. So we're operating out of these old models where the priest has to have his little finger in every little thing going on in the parish. And in a way, we're kind of trained that way still a little bit, or you're mentored that way by older priests, and you realize you're doing it, and you realize it's going to kill you. We have not, the laity, honestly, I don't think have accepted the fact that we have less priests, and still everybody still wants the demands to be met, and the same time frames, but with significantly less clergy. We have, in my diocese right now, we have 35 parishes and only 19 active priests. Now, I would give my bishop credit here. Like, a parish just lost a priest. He was on loan anyways, and we kind of knew he wasn't going to last. And the parish said, "Well, what are you going to do for a priest for us?" And the bishop's like, "I can't do anything. I'll burn out my priests if I give them another parish."
Yeah.
And I'm like, thanks be to God he said that, because, but like, why can't people just drive to places? Why can't you have there are the remote areas, and yes, there's the truth that, people deserve the sacraments, but we also just don't have enough priests. Like I said to my parish a couple weeks ago, when I was getting to a burnout point a few weeks ago myself, and not just parish stuff. I've had I got a lot of stuff in my personal life with friends and stuff like that who are going through a lot of really tough times who you want to support. That takes a lot of time and energy itself. And I said to the people, I said, I'm going to ask an honest question here, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this parish has been around for 62 years. I don't think this parish has ever produced a vocation.
There you go.
So you guys want priests, but you don't want to give your sons to be priests. I didn't say that part. I wanted to say that part, but I didn't say that part.
But it's part of the problem.
It's part of the problem. And like where I really go with it is, like, if you can't provide a priest within 5 years, you're not going to have. If you can't provide a seminary within 5 years, then you're not going to have a priest.
Yeah,
because you need to be spiritually fruitful.
Yeah.
At the same time, so there's burnout. So there's just and there's the same pastoral need. Like, my bishop, who has said he doesn't want priests behind the desk, and I kind of agree with him. The problem is the administrative stuff that's thrown our way nowadays is so heavy that we have to spend a lot of time in the desk. And for myself with ADHD, I struggle to organize my life. So it takes a lot of energy just to make sure things are reasonably organized for the life of the parish. And I still suck at that sometimes. But I have to take that energy and that time to do that, which means I have to spend a lot of time at the desk to make sure that the basic work gets done. So you have that problem. You have the problem of isolation. So I remember when I was in seminary, I was always afraid that I was going to be lonely as a priest. Now, thanks be to God, I've never felt lonely, but I have felt isolated.
Yeah.
And that is hard.
Yeah,
I remember your article. Actually, we talked a bit about a cleric speaking a few weeks ago, because I remember your article on married priests, and I thought there was something to it. And I am not a guy who's like, hey, let's do this, because I don't think we also recognize the cultural shifts that would have to happen in the life of a parish for that to be possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just want it just so that we can just fill the numbers with just more incompetent people. I think no. And I actually, we have a married priest in our diocese. He's not in the ordinary. He's from the Anglican tradition himself. And he told us, he goes, man, the way parishes are structured nowadays, it's impossible to be a married priest. It's hard. When you have kids.
Married clergy is not a panacea. As I wrote in my essay, I mean, I didn't advocate for the elimination of celibacy. I just said, let's think about this.
Exactly.
I mean, born out of my experience, I go to an ordinary at church. My pastor is married and he has 10 kids. And it's been a kind of lovely, eye-opening experience for me to see that it actually can work out quite beautifully in a parish. And so, okay, maybe there are certain but Catholics need to understand, who are strong advocates for a married clergy, that it comes with its own set of huge headaches.
And are you willing to give twice in the collection? Do you know how much it costs to supply for a married priest who wants to send his kids maybe to Catholic stuff and all this jazz? I mean, it's inflation. That's and
true.
Everything.
But that brings us back to the question of isolation, though. That I think personally, based on my conversations with priests, I think there is a great need for diocesan priests to maybe live in a central location together in community, and then sort of commute out to various parishes to do their sort of parish work, just so that there is some level of community amongst the priests. So you're not
and accountability.
That's a very good point.
Just human relationships, because you want to know why priests are weird? Because they live alone.
With their cat.
Yeah. No, I don't know how priests have pets. I don't have the time or the energy or the focus for that. But it's like, this is like, you need that human interaction. You need to come up against each other and rub up against each other to normalize you, so that your preferences don't become the norm of a parish, which can be very tempting to do. So you need that. And so I agree. Oh no. And actually most young priests, we talk about this all the time. So I went to a regional seminary for Western Canada, and we want to sit down with all the bishops of Western Canada one day and say, guys, we need to radically rethink how we're structuring things in Western Canada. And we need you guys to be willing to give permission for guys who want to live in community to move around a bit if they need to, even between dioceses, so that we can foster this, so you don't lose priests, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. So you have that. There's just I know you've talked about this a lot. There's just acedia is a hell of a sin that is rampant, not just in the church, but in the West. And the amount of mediocrity in the life of the church nowadays, in a way, that's always been the case. Okay, this is always, it's outside the first couple centuries of the church, where if you're to be a Christian, you're going to be martyred. Then Constantine comes in, and it really does. The church becomes here comes everyone. And Daniel makes the argument that that's what the church has always meant to be.
Let me interrupt you for just 1 second, for my viewers who don't know. Acedia, ACEDIA, is a sort of spiritual dryness where you lose all sense of consolation, all sense of desiring spiritual things, where the taste for the good just dries up.
Yeah, the West calls it sloth. I like acedia better, because I said it's the inability to desire the good. Yeah. Right. And I say this because I reckon it's a sin in my own heart.
Mine too. Mine too. So, absolutely.
But it's hard, because, and then come in, I'll give it, one of my things this past couple months has been, people want things happening, and I put calls for help for different things, and then no one steps forward, but they still want it to happen. And I just say no. Yeah. I have no problem. I remember when someone said, "Oh, Father, I want to have a rosary with praise and worship music on Saturday mornings every week." And I said, "Great, organize it. Get me a little proposal together, and if you can get the team together, go nuts. oh no, Father, I want you to organize it and do it. I said, absolutely not.
Yeah,
absolutely not. I don't need to do that. I actually don't need to do this, right? We don't, and so the parishes themselves, like we want, and we put our energies into really small-minded things sometimes that don't build up culture and life of community. Like my big hope was, and pastoral council was all behind it, we're still going to do the procession for Corpus Christi, but I wanted to do a big party at a park afterwards and just really let cult flow into culture was my big idea.
Yeah.
No one stepped forward to help. And everyone's like, this is a great idea. We need to do this. And then I got 0 replies for help. Well, I got a couple, but not enough to make it happen.
Not
so
enough.
I'm going to be telling people this week, it ain't happening. And I'm learning to be okay with this. Like, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. And that's just the way it is.
But then
there's also this, I've been blessed in that I have good mentors. A lot of priests don't. And so you don't have those people you can just lean on and talk to who've been through the grind before.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so you say you now know what you can and can't do, and unless people step forward to do these things, you had this big vision, Corpus Christi procession, followed by a big picnic. It didn't happen because nobody stepped forward, and so you've come to accept that. But what does that coming to accept that do to you spiritually as a priest? Because you do have a vision for what you would like to see in your parish and for where you want to lead your people. And instead you're forced to make an accommodation with mediocrity and infantilized laity.
Yeah.
And that's got to wear on your spirit. Like
it does, but I think we also have to be realistic. That's always going to be in the church. That's in every parish is going to have that. The church could be its most vibrant and still have that, I think.
That's a good point.
So I think we need to be careful about Daniel Liu really helped me understand the reality of the church in a beautiful way, that because he saw the Constantinian revolution of the church as a good thing because the church really becomes Catholic. Yes, the church is for the highly devout and the highly mediocre and the highly sinful. Oh,
he says that. Have you read his book, Prayer is a Political Problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's right at the very beginning of that book. He makes this point that
I kind of like it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Constantinism was neither good nor bad, really. It's something that the church had to deal with. But one of the good things that it did do was that it brought religion to mediocre people.
Yeah.
And
they have a right to hear the gospel as well.
Yeah, they do.
And it's always helped me to temper disappointment, which I think is a good thing. So what does it do? One of the things it does is it forces me to ask, am I trying to build something up myself? Right? Because sometimes I am. And so is this what Jesus wants? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing right now as a pastor? Maybe not. I have a lot of ideas, but maybe I need to take things more slowly. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I think this is the thing, and I think this is where maybe there's a bit of a difference between like my own ecclesial experience and maybe what I experienced talking to a lot of Americans is my experience talking to a lot of American priests. There is still this tendency that the pastor is the kind of guy who pulls himself up by his own bootstraps and just builds things and does that's the manly priestly thing. You build these grand institutions, you build new church buildings, you build schools. This is what a good priest should do. And that comes from the early 20th century Irish Episcopal.
Well, it's also very American, right?
Yeah. My sense has been like, I am trying to allow Jesus to allow his judgment, whether good or bad, to expose itself to the parish. And so this is where I've tried to learn how do I manage the burnout thing. And there's a few things. One is I'm now more vocal with my bishop in a respectful way about what my wants, needs, and desires are. I'm also blessed because we're such a small diocese. I actually have quite close contact with my bishop. And I can call him anytime. I have his cell number. I can call him anytime and he'll pick up the phone if he's available. And that's a really beautiful thing to have. But this whole notion of the judgment is, I think, really helpful. So, for example, with finances, instead of working with the money that is coming in, I spend according to the need. And if that puts us in a deficit, that's not on me. And I put monthly bulletin announcements about where we're at financially every month, what we've been spending on generically and everything, so people know. But it's like, this is what we need to spend it on. And if the giving doesn't match what we need to spend eventually, and it makes us bankrupt as a parish, well, then there's the judgment.
Yeah.
There's a judgment. We clearly cannot. Why am I going to break my back to nickel and dime things, to pay the staff less than they ought to be paid? Then they're miserable because of all the crap they have to deal with it in office all the time. Why are we doing this? That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, and then you become a glorified fundraiser coming up with all these cockamamie schemes for making raffles and stuff.
Most fundraisers are a waste of time. For me, my principle of fundraiser is it needs to be big and it needs to build up the life of a parish. I did this when I was a seminarian for World Youth Day. Because I used to do swing dancing for years. So we did a swing dancing fundraiser. It's $25 a ticket. But I said to people, we have to sell it out. Otherwise, it's a failure. And I said to the students, because these are all like 18, 19-year-old kids who, at the time, $25 was a lot of money to ask for people to spend on a ticket. But I said, I will sell half the tickets. You guys have to sell the other half. And we did it. We raised $11,000 in one night. And it was a good community builder for the kids who are going on pilgrimage. But the most important thing was it was a community builder for the parish, and it evangelized. I had one guy come up to me, he goes, I've never seen so many people from so many cultures come to one place. He goes, I want to know more about this Catholic thing because of this. And I was like, that's it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's where we want to put the energy, right? So I also just say this is what I can and can't do. And I've learned to say no. And I've also, and I think that's a really hard thing for priests to do, but you have to take reality seriously.
Yeah.
And the reality is there's not enough of us and there's not enough volunteers. And so you say to people, well, I'm sorry, because it teaches them then, are you willing to become an adult now and to help cooperate with the life of the parish? Like, I hate it when people say, oh, what do you want me to do, Father? I'm like, I don't know. When that question's asked, I'm like, I have no idea, because I don't know. And the things that I might need help with, most people can't help with.
Yeah.
But if you come with, hey, Father, I see this need in the parish, and I think I can help in this way, man, that is a great gift to a priest. What a great gift right there. What a huge thing. The other thing is what we're going to be doing, because I don't think most people from my parish will ever watch this, so this is fine. I'm nixing my religious ed program.
Oh, wow. Because it doesn't do any good?
It doesn't meet the needs anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. So
what we're doing is we're doing a monthly family group. And then meal. This is my model. This is the model. I actually kind of stole this from Alpha, which I don't really care for anymore, but I think its model works. Food and fellowship and friendship. A lot happens over a meal. Formation. You take the parents aside. Here's what you're going to teach your kids over the next month at home to make the faith normalized at home. Yeah. And if you want your kids to get confirmed in First Communion, you have to come to this group. But you're going to want to, because we're putting out the main meal for you. You guys just have to bring a salad or buns or whatever. It's easy. And then the kids, we have other teachers to go and learn and to hear what they're doing. Like, so maybe, this kid's not really getting things. We can talk to the parents one-on-one. Like, and it becomes collaborative. And there's the parent who's afraid about how to teach the faith to the kids. Well, you go over to the other family's house and you guys do the lessons together.
Yeah, cooperative.
So, right? Yeah. And then you do maybe like 10 minutes of adoration at the end, because with 3-year-olds, you can't do anything more than 10 minutes. But then eventually, if I can get another priest to help out, we can even hear confessions that night, because we know how hard it is for families to get out to confessions, right? I've been pitching this to families in my parish. They all love it. And so this is the thing. You need to do things that are building up, that build you up. And I love good liturgy, and and the families, if you're going to Mass nowadays, I want to focus on that, because they are the people who have evangelical zeal. I
think that's a great model. I mean, we do something similar in our ordinary parish where, especially during Lent and Advent, we'll have a big, after the main Mass on Sunday morning, we have a big potluck supper, lunch in the parish basement. And when the potluck is sort of done, or people are still sort of eating their dessert, the pastor has been putting on like a Robert Barron video of Catholicism, or on the Creed, or on the Eucharist, and people sit and watch that and then discuss it. And it's a far more effective way, I think, of reaching people than the old religious ed model.
And who knows their kids better than the parents? They'll know that kid's more artsy, so I'm going to teach this material to them with art. That kid's more abstract, so I can teach them maybe through catechism statements and stuff like this. And a parent, it also builds up their own faith. which is what you want. Because the number one thing I've noticed for why do families not go to church when I was first ordained was they don't know anyone. That's the number one reason. It has nothing to do with against anything in the church, but you have a good experience of community around this. You're going to want to go to church already. And you can only do so much as one priest. And so my hope is you build up this core group, but then you slowly allow other people in the parish into this. And then you also heal those generational divides a bit more, and to just say this is a place for everyone, and this group who is evangelically zealous, because if you're having 6 kids and going to mass, you're not just someone who goes to mass on Sunday. And I think if you can just focus on these little things and learn to say no to the others and to be okay with that, it becomes a bit of a judgment on the parish to say, yep, Father can't do everything, and that's just the way it is. And he's made priorities. And I think that can address burnout a bit. I think the big one, though, is, and I actually proposed this to my bishop, because here's the funny thing. I'm a diocesan priest, but I've actually never desired to be a pastor. It's never been on my heart to be a pastor. I want to be a teacher. That's where my heart is. And that's my charism. I know that. And I said to my bishop, what if we ordered our diocese according to charisms? I said, we would have priests all on fire. Now, some priests don't care about charisms and wouldn't give 2 hoots about whatever they do. And that's, God bless them, But for me, imagine if instead of having a parish, I work part-time in the parish, helping out because I think there is importance to pastoral work, but then letting me travel the diocese to teach.
Oh, yeah.
And help the priests who can't teach. And wow, man, then the young guys see priests on fire for their priesthood and say, I want that. And wait, I can be a priest who loves and serves the poor, or I can be a priest who can teach. I can be a priest who's a pastor. I can be a priest who does hospital ministry. I can be a priest who does all these different things. I want in. And that's how you start getting vocations. And then and then the burnout problem becomes less. And you're not so burnt out because you're doing something you love. Yes, there's always tough things to do in the life of a priest, but your life is focused around the thing you love. And I am grateful that my bishop at least has let me do my PhD, but it's been very hard to do when you're a pastoral parish. But at least I have that, I
imagine. Well, I'm really glad I initiated this conversation because you've come up with a lot of great ideas. Obviously, you've been thinking about this for a long time. And
I've experienced the burnout, so I know what it's like.
And I think you should be made a bishop and implement all of these plans. Or I might start a cause for the next conclave where you'll be drafted and you can become El Jefe and take over everything. But that's great. I once had a seminary rector, and what he said angered me at the time. And he said in a little session, he says, gentlemen, just remember this. A job worth doing is sometimes worth doing poorly. And at the time I thought, what is that? What kind of a recipe for mediocrity is that? But now in retrospect, looking back, I think this is what he was trying to say, which is learn to say no. And even among the things you say yes to, realize don't make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Exactly.
And don't swing for the fences all the time, and don't fill your mind with all kinds of unrealistic parish ideals. Do what you can to the best of your abilities. And then if you've got time to be creative and come up with ideas like you've come up with, share them with your bishop. You're lucky because you do have a relationship with your bishop, I guess, where you can share.
Most guys don't.
And most guys don't. And that's a problem.
And,
but hey, go ahead.
My bishop and I was going to say, my bishop and I, do we see eye to eye on everything? Absolutely not. But I trust him with my life. I really do.
Well, that's fantastic.
And, because I know, and I mean, you grow into these things, right? And I've learned some really good things. I've learned some things I would never do personally as a bishop. But again, no one's perfect. And when you're in leadership, you realize that you are probably going to make the wrong decision, and there's nothing you can do about it. And to just learn to be okay with it. But we need to start doing and actually it's interesting, this whole family idea I found out from my bishop, because to me, he's like, I love this is a great idea. He goes, actually, this is what Rome wants. Rome's been pushing this idea because this is actually a very South American model, by the way. I've actually learned this years ago from someone from South America. And but it's nice to have that discussion with him, and it's nice and you learn from that, so that when you're in leadership you realize, do what, and it's like being a parent. Right? When you're a parent,
absolutely,
you're going to make the wrong decisions parenting your kids, but they know that you still love them.
Yeah. Well, I made a lot of mistakes as a parent.
And I think if we can approach the parish more akin to a family, which is going to have infighting and frustrations and weaknesses and moments of little glories, and moments of real gifts that are unexpected and everything in between, that's when the parish is healthy, and that's when a priest doesn't burn out, and that's when a priest will work his butt off for everyone. Because and that's what we have to start trying to build in some small way. I'll end with this. This is the little grace I received yesterday. I was at a parishioner's house. Their son was just confirmed in his first communion yesterday. We do restored order in our diocese, and I'm sitting there at the table, and I hear his little adorable 3-year-old child saying, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." I'm like, why does she keep on saying Jesus? And I look at her, and she's looking at me, and she's saying Jesus. She's calling me Jesus. She was talking about the dessert she's eating, and I was just like, that's a sign of a good family life, right? like, not that it's the norm home, but of the parish. There's a couple other families there, and that was a real great gift. And when you have stuff like that, experiences like that, you want to be a pastor.
Well, you need to rename your podcast then, Clerically Speaking, with Jonathan and Jesus. There you go.
Exactly. J squared.
Instead of Anthony and Harrison, it's Jonathan. Since I renamed Anthony.
Exactly. He's going to love this.
All right. Hey, well, I got to tell you, our session's going to time out here in a few minutes. Okay. So, but my goodness, thank you so much. This has just been a fantastic conversation. When I emailed you last week or whatever it was, let's do this again. I was thrilled when you said yes, because our conversations are just always fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, and thanks everybody for watching. I'm going to hit the stop record button.